Hey, this is a little bit of overlap actually from three, four, I don't know, a few other talks that I did before. So this is a little bit of a combination between schema on write and ETL pipeline and instrumentation like lineage and metrics. So what I was going to quickly talk about is, hey, there's this notion of schema on write, which we talked about before, schema on read versus schema on write. So this is the notion that we're actually going to create a version of the data. So there are certain data stores where joins are expensive and where storage is cheap. And so in those cases, what we'd really like to do is, one option is to arrange the data so that it's ready, consumer ready, right? So like in a relational database, we really do it for a combination of inserts and deletes and updates, and we run queries and we do all kinds of joiny stuff against it. And really, that's schema on read. Relational database is schema on read for all intents and purposes, especially if you think about using views, right? So if I do views, I built a schema for the consumer, but it basically happens at read time that it gets populated. Materialized view might be thought of as schema on write. Anyway, so what are we going to talk about? A pipeline. So and document databases and some cloud storage, even though cloud storage is tables, they sort of have some of the same characteristics when we talk about this schema on write. Like you build a document database to be consumable. And both of them you will make redundant and extra information so that because storage is cheap, so you don't really care. So, which is the opposite of relational databases. Storage is kind of pricey, and you're generally almost always been taught to make it where the data exists only in one place at one time. So for what we're talking about, schema on write, data is eventually consistent, right? It's not immediately consistent, and sometime later it'll catch up. So what the pipeline I was really looking at here was kind of, hey, if we were going to put this in the lake, and if we were going to make a copy at each stage, which sometimes you might not, what are the options here? So when we bring data in, we ingest it, and we put it in the raw area. This is basically kind of like the regulatory and compliance mailbox or Dropbox area. And this is so that you have traceability. Sometimes people will call this true source. I will actually add a label to this that says true source. When you ingest that, we may actually want to catch lineage and log where this came from and the fact that we ingested it and the data was put into here on this date and it resides in this data set. The next stage past ingestion is really kind of format standardization. And so it might be ingested as a CSV or an Avro object, and we might convert that to Parquet to put it in a table, or we convert it to a JSON or Avro document as different style to put it into to get it ready for our document database. So what I would argue is this is sort of format standardization. We went from some input transition data, and we converted it to some canonical format. The next stage is to actually enrich the data using business rules and reference data. And so some places will call this a view model, right? So we're going to take the raw data and we're going to convert it into a view model by enriching it and by running business rules on it. So like in a machine space, that might be categorization. We're going to take all credit scores between here and make them high, and all credit scores between here and here and make them medium, and all credit scores between here and label them pandemic. I don't know. So that would be the view model. So then the question is, so those were like possibly three schemas, but you could kind of think of that as really just an enriched data store. So then the question is, what do you do after that? There might be another level of view built onto this, another schema. So we have the canonical model, we've got the business-driven consumption or view model, and there might be different versions of that based on different rules for different divisions. And then the other thing we might do is we might do a customer specific. So if we want to use the storage, so a lot of these don't have like field filtering or column filtering, right? And they might not have row filtering in the results. So, and those filtering will be based on the authorizations that the consumer has, right? So the producer puts all this data in, we enrich it with data that maybe everybody shouldn't see, and then we create, I talked about this before, a secrecy, privileged one, and a non-privileged view of that. And what we'll actually do in schema on write is we will create filters in the pipeline, and we will write those out as extra schemas. So in this case, we brought a producer's data in, and we wrote it out with 2 different consumer view models based on the security we needed. In some cases, and so the beauty of this is in the cloud, it works with cloud better with cloud controls. Cloud controls are really built around the data service itself, data set itself, or the objects on the disk or in the cloud. And so it's best if we can align our data with the security model. This is really about aligning with the security model. At the same time, it may be there's some subset of users that we need to do something different with. So we could still do schema on read if we wanted to, right? The consumption model and the consumer view models are closely related. The 2 consumer models are really just filtered versions of those based on the permissions. If we didn't want to write a view out for a couple, like maybe we had a third party that was a different, or I don't know, something else, an API, we might want to filter those out differently. And in that case, we could still do schema on read. So we've got data in the lake or in a document database with the coarse grain controls at the document level or at the data set level. When we pull those out and we need to do filtering, we could still do schema on read. But if we want to give highly optimized, well-regulated, highly controlled views of that data to consumers, then the way to do this is with schema on write and create consumer view models. That's it. Have a great day.